I'm Gaele Sobott. I live on Darug land in Western Sydney, Australia. I'm a writer, and most of my writing deals with um, injustice, oppression, and exploitation on a day-to-day basis in our everyday lives, and the various ways that people resist that and build alternatives. I'm most comfortable writing fiction. I write short stories, I write poems, I've written a literary biography. I also like to write histories that are not in the public eye. I conduct oral interviews and publish those on occasions. And I also sometimes like to use my research and writing skills to collaborate and work in solidarity with people to assist them in telling their stories. In this regard, it's important that those people have control over the process and the final product. I'm also founder and creative director of Outlandish Arts, a disabled-led organisation that works with disabled writers, dancers and artists and creates platforms for their work. I lived in Botswana for what now amounts to over a third of my life. I married there, our daughters were born there and grew up there. I received my undergraduate education at the University of Botswana, and I have a deep love for the country. My writing began there and was informed and is informed still by the smells, the rhythms, the geography, the oral traditions and culture of Botswana and of Southern Africa. My first short stories were published by Staff Writer magazine, which many of you will know was an anti-apartheid platform for a new generation of community-based arts groups allied with the Black Consciousness movement. Many of the stories I wrote at that time explored the way oral traditions and tales inform and seep into and become a reality of daily life. I felt also a need to write children's stories with African contexts. When our children were in primary school, the only books they had access to were written and illustrated in England and were not relevant. I also wrote about the very brutal presence of apartheid. One of the stories published by Staff Writer was a response to the South African Defence Force cross-border military attacks and murder of people in Botswana in 1985. I recently visited the trauma of those events and read through the reports on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa's proceedings, which reveal really just the tip of the iceberg of the incredible horror and cruelty of institutionalized racism. And I wrote another short story called Grandmother, published by the South African literary journal New Contrast. I wrote that story because I want those who resisted apartheid, those who were killed, those who died in those cross-border raids to be remembered. And I also wanted to pay homage to the two Botswana women, our neighbours, who were murdered by the South African Defence Force in those raids. Activism can take so many forms, some seemingly minor, but when they're added together, they can become significant. In terms of writing fiction, I've always explored women's and gender oppression. I wrote non-fiction about Botswana women's lives during the Second World War, interviewing women who farmed the land, who looked after the cattle and kept their families and communities alive during a time when the majority of the working male population was fighting for the British or working in the South African mines for the war effort. The work I did with the Bankstown First Nations elders in assisting them to create and edit their oral history project, I think, is also important. It provides an alternative history and a record of culture, care for community, care for country, love and humour and resilience in struggle that I think is an important resource. I also collaborated with First Nations boxer Wally Carr to write his life story, My Longest Round, published by Magabala Books. Again, I think it's a valuable resource, and since Wally has now died, it has become his legacy. But for these resources to be effective, they need to be read widely and to be accessible to large numbers of people. We need people with the skills to use these resources as teaching, and that is a little bit problematic. That's an area we need to do more work. I am a disabled writer. I move through the world as a disabled person, and I understand oppression and exploitation to some degree using that lens. My focus has never been on diversifying the mainstream. I'm not really interested in the concept of inclusion. I don't think these approaches bring about the systemic change that we need. I mean, I support, and it's great to see disabled writers on a panel, for example, and I think oppressed groups should keep chipping away at doing this, but I think we need to focus more on other areas. Often it's the same people who get invited into the room. The audiences are not really the people who need the systemic change. In the case of disabled people, the audiences are mainly non-disabled, they're not intersectional, and the pervasive eugenics that inform healthcare, education, crisis management continues to rise. Disabled people are in every oppressed group, and they are most likely to be poor, unemployed, disabled. Black and First Nations peoples are more likely to experience police violence, incarceration, death in custody. The ratio of disabled people in refugee communities and seeking asylum, it's also high. In terms of my activism with Outlandish Arts, my disability activism, apart from the obvious benefits to artists of getting their artwork out there and being paid for that, I think the importance is in developing disabled leadership and disabled thought and knowledge on crucial areas of struggle. For example, our most recent project, FIRE, gives disabled people some say in the climate crisis, and brings a disabled perspective to the fore in terms of contributing to humanity's struggle against the increasing crises we're facing under capitalism. Disabled people aren't invited to the table at all in any of these policy making areas. And basically, we need disabled people's perspectives to survive. There's such an urgency now for change. Sometimes it's hard to see how the activism we're involved in makes a difference. With this FIRE project, it's a VR project, and it's modular, so we can get it into various communities and use it again as a resource. But I think we are at the beginning of the apocalypse. We are in it. And we need to organise. We need to get back our organisational skills and develop our organisational skills. I think we also need to be more aggressive, take up rearguard actions. Like, I can understand why churches are burning in Canada at the moment. I can understand why communities sabotage the assets of oil and gas companies. I would understand communities finding inventive ways to stop the likes of the Murdoch press from operating the way it does. What I would say to my younger self is, it's okay to be on the outside. You don't have to strive to be part of the mainstream, to be included in a power construct you don't even agree with. So I'd tell my younger self, go for it, create alternative platforms, write with the flexibility, the intuitiveness that comes from not fitting the norm, from feeling oppression, from feeling the oppression of others. I'd just say go for it and keep writing, keep working with other people, keep collaborating, keep working in solidarity, keep acting to make change and value and nurture yourself for doing that. What tips would I give to young writers taking part in the Summer of Freedom reads? Building alternatives to oppressive behaviours and systems, I think, means starting small and starting in our communities, knowing our contexts, the needs of the people around us, and from that position, I think we can begin to act in solidarity with the needs of other oppressed communities. Our communities are not going to take up the larger ideological struggles without first being empowered to deal with their everyday concerns. So I think they need to see successes at that level and to understand that they have the skills to make change. So I suppose my main tip would be start small and work outwards. Okay.